Today I'm pleased to introduce Paul Fuesel with Studio KPG. Studio KPG was the consultant that the city contracted with for the Railroad Avenue corridor study. This was born out of the downtown visioning and the road diet project over a year ago now. So this gives us, the city, a little more information on what possibilities are specifically with Railroad Avenue from 1st to 10th, and then, 1st to 12th, 12th to 101, around Evergreen Square, and then around Tully, the post office, and Post Office Park. So I'll hand it over to Paul at this point, and he's got a little presentation for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to run through a summary tonight of what the study included. It was an exercise to look at the corridor from essentially the park and ride site all the way to Front Street from both a multimodal point of view and any enhancements that can help in the the continued revitalization of downtown. The project goals, like I just mentioned, was to review multimodal and downtown enhancements. It was to really build upon the community vision and action plan, so we didn't want to repeat any steps there. It was to look at both future concepts and short-term projects, and I'll speak to those as we go along. And then the grant from the Washington State Department of Commerce Business Services Division was also about looking at potential infrastructure projects. The four areas of focus, as Mark mentioned, is in this diagram. This is a sheet out of the study. The section of Railroad Avenue is from US 101 and the Park and Ride to 12th, and then from 12th to Front Street is essentially the Downtown Action Plan. The little red rectangle is Evergreen Square, and the purple rectangle is Post Office Park and Tully. So the first section, taking us from the Park and Ride on the other side of 101 to 12th, was an exercise of trying to figure out, with limited right-of-way, how can we do some multimodal improvement. So I want to go through some of the things we looked at. There was also actually a layer of additional items. We looked at wayfinding along US 101. We looked at a gateway designed for Deegan for visitors getting off the road and then being oriented to Shelton and downtown Shelton. Then the pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and then we also did look at the spur line from a multimodal point of view. What we discovered, and everybody kind of knows this within the community, is that when you're passing up 101 from north or south, there are three exits that are pronounced miles ahead of the actual entrances. And what we recognized in this bottom left image, I guess the laser pointer won't show it, is that there is a city center sign that has a white line, and underneath that Matlock. And it isn't quite apparent that city center means Shelton. Now, the US DOT has, in multiple places, city center plus the name of the community. So we did a little graphic on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide that says City Center Shelton. And we think that would really help in terms of understanding that you're heading to the downtown Shelton. Another thing that we looked at is once you get off the off-ramp and you head up Railroad Avenue to town, that there's a little information kiosk that's been out there for about 20 years or so. And that is right next to Deegan Road, and that is a great candidate for a potential gateway sign. This is county. It's outside the city limits, but it's within the
UGA?
Exactly. And so at some point, this will probably be captured by the community, so why not capture at least with the gateway sign? And for the sake of the study exercise, we wanted to build upon the 3rd Street gateway and then just explore other kinds of possibilities as a long-term project, or it could be short-term, that the community might look at a means to figure out what a gateway design might be. So we just have some graphics there. There are no designs yet, but just concepts to work with. So now we're going to talk about the ped bicycle facilities along this stretch. Right here at the creek at Goldsboro, it's obvious that there's no sidewalk facilities or bicycle facilities. The actual bridge structure has about 42 inches of concrete kind of sidewalk on the backside of the guardrail, but there's no sidewalks leading to it. So essentially, there's no facilities here. And this is the pinch point along the corridor. The right-of-way widens out towards US 101, but a lot of the stretch of the roadway is only 40 feet of right-of-way, particularly along the spur line. So it's a very limited amount of area that currently could be improved without having to go get easements on either private property or along the spur line. So, actually, I go back. The dilemma with the bridge is to get bicycle facilities and sidewalks is that it would require widening the bridge, which would be a big fiscal impact. So for the sake of this study, we tried to keep it within realm of feasibility, and this is a county section, it's not the city section. So when we looked at the big picture with the group, we realized that the spur line, well, first the park and ride is the ideal place to connect. So from a multimodal point of view, people could, if you can get on their bikes to that location to and from, certainly it's a park and ride lot, but we want to connect all those modes, that we could take a look at the spur line as one possibility. We know right now it's potentially activated for use, and that would be a great use for that corridor. If that wasn't to happen, at least theoretically, the study says that is also a possibility. And really, the connection along the spur line is to connect along 101 to have a separated bicycle facility for users and not put them on Railroad Avenue. So we're not saying it's the best way to go, but from a feasibility of cost, it might be long-term a way to go. So this picture points out the existing utility poles. There's driveways along Railroad Avenue. Most of the land use is on the south and east, but there are some on the north and the west. I've only seen a few pedestrians in my minimal number of trips to the community. I saw a mom with a stroller out there. There is a need for people to walk along the corridor, but there's really no facilities with the meandering shoulders that are out there. So we thought, well, what could we fit in here with 40 feet of right-of-way? And one thing that became obvious is potential of a 6-foot sidewalk, in this case on the south side, that connects most of the land uses that are bringing people towards Railroad Avenue, people coming up their drives and driveways. And then for the sake of kind of a big picture, long-term vision, doing something if the rail line becomes available 5 or 10 years from now. Working with the county, they're very open to adding minimal bicycle or pedestrian facilities. The bicycle facilities are hard because if you add those, and let's see even a sidewalk on the other side, your cross-section's wider than the 40 feet, because you also have to have the utility poles within that space. So for the sake of the study, we tried to keep it really minimal in terms of improvements. And so they support this, and there's actually enough room to not even move the poles to get in a 6-foot sidewalk. There's 2 cross sections here. The top is showing existing conditions. The travel lanes are 10 to 12 feet wide on how they're striped in the county portion. And right now the rail line isn't active, but the potential of it being activated we consider to be a good possibility. In terms of long-term plan, if that ever becomes available, again, you could have a shared use, multi-use path for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And that would be used from anybody who wanted to commute to anybody just visiting for a weekend in Shelton and want to just get out on their bikes to and from. You could do a whole thing with having bikes available for visitors or people coming off the bus with their bikes, whatever kind of scenario. And then the sidewalk along the south side is what this section's showing. There, and then the trail on the north side. I should back up and mention that there would be potential stormwater improvements that need to happen. You'd probably put curb and gutter where the sidewalk is to have some differentiation. So there are some civil engineering improvements that would need to happen. All right, now the next section is from 12th to Front Street. And again, we wanted to build on the downtown action plan. And we're also going to then also talk about Evergreen Square and Post Office Park and Tolly. So the number one thing we would have recommended, and that's also one of the recommendations of the vision plan, is the road diet. So the city successfully just restriped Railroad Avenue, and it works just fine. 4 lanes to 3 lanes still carries about the same amount of traffic, and it's much safer for pedestrians to cross. You now have additional bike lane space, so it's really a win-win-win for downtown. It would be our number one thing for any downtown improvement, and that's what our focus is with our company. On-street parking was looked at in the initial phase around angle parking, and that was not considered a viable option. The parallel parking is available. That works great. Crosswalks are demarcated in a nice colored painted area, so those are very strong crosswalks now for pedestrians and for vehicles coming down the corridor that they know there could be pedestrians there. We'll look at enhancements around Evergreen Square and Post Office Park in relationship to community activities. So I hadn't realized that it was fully striped when I did the slideshow. I was showing you before, and I wish I had the after picture, but I don't. I'm going to skip on that from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, and these are the images that were used to actually do the striping. So after driving it both directions and walking along it, I would deem it a full success. This image was just to show that if you wanted to create a variation to the asphalt out there, there is different in pavement imprints that could be done. They're still flush for parades and things like that. So you already have the color, it's just if you want to texturize it. So now back to Railroad Avenue and a little bit of history. So in 1927, when the spur line was active and the roundhouses in the backdrop of the picture and the rail lines moving up and down the corridor, Railroad Avenue is a one-sided main street. All the buildings were all on the south side of the road. The north side, any of those buildings that were commercial were way far back and probably facing the next street over. What that caught our attention looking at the picture is it in a lot of the spaces block by block have these open areas because that's where the rail line was. And that could be considered potential in terms of long-term vision, opportunities to create a wider promenade since you have that space. And when we look at Evergreen Square and Post Office Park, we got some ideas around that. And then, of course, this picture also shows when Tolly's being parked, this wide space that's been infilled little by little. The purple stripe in this image, again, is just showing from a plan view, and the center image is right where Evergreen Square is, that there is this space available. Just to the west is the bank, and of course that space is not available because that newer building encroached within that area. But from block to block, you might have these opportunities. Evergreen Square is a public parking lot. Is pretty much right now just used for parking. And in these downtown cores for revitalization and for community activities, you really look for flexible space. And this is a fantastic candidate for making it more of a flexible space. And one of the things we've seen in other places is taking a parking lot and making it look different than a parking lot, let it function as a parking lot until you have an activity where you get the cars off of it and you hold other activities. And before I show you pictures of that, I do want to point out that, the sidewalks aren't continuous along there, and that those improvements would be a nice improvement. Maybe some of that parking could go away along the west side is a concept, and that the center part of the parking lot, either as asphalt or some other improvement of concrete, could still be striped as a parking lot, but have a different kind of larger plaza feel. So these are 2 examples that we found that are in the study. The one on the left is in downtown Redmond. It's a newer parking lot that was painted by an artist, and you can see it on Google Earth if you Google it. The Redmond Central Connector. That's primarily used as a parking lot, but they do hold civic activities here when they do things within the park where they need a hardscape. The other image is Shoreline's Farmers Market that is by the Sears site off Aurora Avenue. And they have this beautiful logo that they're painting over a series of summers with the community. And the logo is actually being painted right on the parking lot, but the parking stripes are still there. So when they don't have the farmers market, people are parking there. So conceptually, that could be a short-term or a long-term kind of project for Evergreen. The other aspect of it is to take a look at downtown parking, and if along this stretch, because the clock tower is actually a focal point in downtown. It's been a place where the community has been celebrating different and memorializing different events. And if some of that on-street parking came off, that we could create more of a wider sidewalk zone in the concept of that promenade that could then extend over into the parking lot area. And it could be either a raised sidewalk or it could be flush, whatever condition, that could allow for more civic activities right in the heart of downtown, right in the front yard, so that everybody sees these activities and it just gets everybody that much more engaged. Post Office Park in Tolly. When we looked at Post Office Park, between the gazebo and the Christmas tree, it's pretty hard to do any improvements to what is a fantastic celebration. So we didn't really have too many recommendations about the actual park space. But when we're looking at Railroad Avenue and trying to, again, increase Tolly's presence on the corridor and space for visitors and communities, or citizens to gather, that space is at a premium along there. So I'm going to show you some pictures. First, the concept with Post Office Park is to take the existing green area, and if we took off a few more of those parking stalls, which I know are all heavily used for the post office, perhaps we can get another connection with a little bit more green that takes the park and brings it right up to Railroad Avenue. And then some of that parallel parking that's along Tolly, if that was removed, we'd have that much more space for a wider promenade sidewalk. And what really is obvious is when you're standing out there and you realize you're pinched between the parking and Tolly, and that there really is a need when there's, families and other gatherings just to have a little bit more room. And, in this case, the FedEx is even kind of blocking what is, one of the key pieces of sculpture in downtown, a kid favorite. So this particular image just kind of shows that if you took the on-street parking off, you would almost double your sidewalk side there. And there's still lots and lots of parking between Evergreen Square and the parking in the Post Office Park and the surrounding. And then this image is trying to show how we could bring green across the corner. It's not showing the sidewalk connection that we'd put in. Crossing it from the park over to this area, you could even do a little raised crosswalk there and just keep traffic really minimal as they're going through the post office, and really trying to extend the park feel right up to Railroad Avenue. So, my number one bullet's done. Implement next phase of road diet, it's been done. So that was kind of the short-term project that would have been most important for the corridor. The next would be to coordinate with the county about sidewalk improvements at the very least, just to have some pedestrian facilities that people could get to. For those folks who are on the north and the west side of the corridor, we'd have to figure out where crosswalks could take them over, so we could have some safe crossings. That's important. The spur line and its potential activation, if things don't work with that, then it would be maybe acquiring a portion of that for potential rail to trail. Develop a gateway design at Deegan Road would really be an enhancement to Railroad Avenue in the downtown. Coordinate with WashDOT for the wayfinding signage would be a pretty easy early win to get those signs changed. And then working with the community on development, some variety of enhancements to the sidewalk spaces and the parking lot use at Evergreen Square, and also Post Office Park and Tolly. So really everything that the study is bringing forward is in support of the action plan and trying to find pretty easy wins, short-term and long-term, that really help benefit Railroad Avenue and the community. So any questions?
Any questions?
Now, I would just, did you look at the width of the rail corridor? Because it was my understanding that if we were able to negotiate for a portion of that, we may be able to accomplish the widening of the street as well as the sidewalks with an active rail there.
I think that's possible. It's a much wider right-of-way than the 40 feet that the street
Yeah.
has. And the only thing that would be considered from an engineering, they're on two different grades, so there would have to be a cost around the grade issue with walls and stuff. But I would think spatially, you could make that work. We didn't quite dive in that deep around that, but I think that's a real possibility.
Okay.
And we did a similar thing in downtown Snoqualmie. We have a walkway that's right next to an active rail line that's being used.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. Give us something to look at.
You're welcome.
Very
Thank you
nice.
so much.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.